U.S. Army retired, Executive Vice President, AFCEA International.
Thank you. Good morning. Ready? Well, thank you very much, and welcome to day 3. As the announcer mentioned, very good to see you here. I'm glad that everybody had hopefully a good night. A little bit rainy, but you made it to a dry space in the right place. We've had coffee on the floor. The theaters this morning opened up to a good crowd, and it's amazing to see the interest that continues in our subject, in our topic, and in our team. It really is a team that we're representing here: industry, government, academia. Happy to see the new exhibitors, happy to see the new subjects, and frankly, a lot of new faces as transitions continue. Today we're going to have an opportunity to listen to a panel that I think is going to address a topic that's pretty important in our defensive lineup. We had a set of discussions yesterday, everything from General Morrison, who opened up talking about cyber operators, not defense or offense, but cyber operators, and noting that the idea of his joint schoolhouse that he runs there, the programs that he's undertaking, and really building the force in the ranks for the mission. We also had really a good introduction on Joint Force Headquarters DODIN at lunch. It was, I think, a full spread of looking at the operational focus of that organization, understanding its battle rhythm, and looking at the types of products and the type of operations that they're planning for. Dr. Duchek followed with an idea about developing solutions that had a spread of technical, business, and government solutions that move the idea of building solutions, which is one of our 3 Ds in our theme this year, DISA in 3D, delivering solutions. And the innovation showcases theaters that went on. We had about 11 theaters that went on in a variety of subjects and solutions that were out on the showcase floor. So we really had a full day yesterday to prime us for this morning, a morning that we're going to talk about delivering lethality to the Joint Force. We have a variety of things going on today, and I'll cover them at the end as we talk about transitions back to the floor. We are going today to talk about supporting lethality of the force. It's no surprise, I was a deputy commander to General Mattis when he was commanding Joint Forces Command, and lethality came up often in our conversations. It was no surprise at all that there was a very pointed idea that came through in the strategy, and the idea of across all domains delivering lethality. So to do that, and to do it with the force in the area of cyber, we have a whole host of presentations this morning moderated by Rear Admiral Kathleen Creighton, Deputy Commander of the Joint Force Headquarters DODIN. We heard a lot about their battle rhythm and operations yesterday, but today we're going to talk a little bit about, with a spread of players here, a little more in depth about that subject of delivering lethality. It's good to have Admiral Creighton here. We lost one. She grew up outside West Point, so the Army just lost one here. But we're very, very proud and very happy to see this kind of experience, talent brought to this task. She's held a variety of C4 staff leadership positions, but importantly, a lot of leadership positions in the fleet, at sea, on a host of, well, let's see, I counted the carriers. I've got the Kennedy, the Truman, the Enterprise, and I know she has also worked well with the 10th Fleet. Good experience, great leadership, brought to bear on an important task. Ladies and gentlemen, she's assembled a great panel for you here today. I know you'll enjoy it, and please welcome, if you will, our panel to the stage and their talk. Thank you.
I'm going to stand up here for 1 second. Is that okay? Can I use this mic? Awesome. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having us here. It's my pleasure to host this panel. And the thing I'm most excited about this panel is that it's truly diverse, and diverse in all ways. As General Wood so kindly introduced me, I'm the Deputy Commander of Joint Force Headquarters DoD Information Networks. And we are essentially the defensive arm of U.S. Cyber Command. Cyber Command, as you know, just a week and a half ago, became the 10th Combatant Command. So it's a very exciting time for Cybercom and Joint Force Headquarters DODIN. And just quickly, to give you a sense, if you've not heard of the organization, what we are is a C2 headquarters to command and control the defense of the DoD information network. And that is the largest network in the world. And we have divided it into 42 areas of operation. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is that it's a diverse set of organizations that we're commanding and controlling. It's services, it's combatant commands, and it's agencies and field activities. And so the reason I bring this up is that our panelists today represent kind of a subset of those different organizations, and they bring that set of experiences and points of view. And not only is it defensive folks, like the organization I work for right now, but we have service cyber components who are involved in the whole range of cyberspace operations. We have a rep here from the Cyber National Mission Force, which conducts defensive cyberspace operations response actions, DCORA. And then we have an industry teammate. And I'm not going to introduce them. What I'll do right now is I'm going to turn it over to each of them to introduce themselves. And then what we're going to do is I have a series of questions, and we're going to start with one and go down the line to answer those questions. And then at the end, we're going to turn to you for your questions. So I believe you're given the address there to send your questions to, and we'll get to those after we go through about 7 questions that we have teed up. All right. So we're going to start with Steve Hager to introduce himself.
Good morning. So I'm Steve Hager. I came on active duty in the late 80s. My first assignment was up here at Fort Meade, and I left active duty after my assignment here, and I became an Army reservist, and I moved back to Silicon Valley, where I was born and raised, because I love the technology sector. So I did a traditional job as an Army reservist, and then in 2013 I was mobilized. I had done the traditional things as a battalion commander in the Signal Corps, brigade commander, did a tour in Afghanistan, came back again as an O&M guy for running the Army's network. My last assignment, I was the Army Central Command G6, where I ran the network all the way from Egypt to Pakistan as we were taking over, starting operations into Mosul and Raqqa. And then somebody asked me, hey, what do you want to do next? And I said, I'd like to get one of those cyber gigs. So they assigned me to be the Deputy Commander of Operations for the Cyber National Mission Force, whereas Admiral Creighton said we do a lot of interesting full-spectrum cyber operations. So I'm very honored to be here, be on the panel, and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rick Howard. I'm the Chief Security Officer for Palo Alto Networks. I have 3 jobs there. I'm overall in charge of security, both physical and cyber for the company. I'm in charge of the threat intelligence team called Unit 42, and then a third of my job is out in the world talking to network defenders like you all, just about the state of cybersecurity. I'm an old Army guy, did 23 years in. I was a signal guy. My last Army job, I ran the Army CERT for a couple years. It was a fantastic job. And I get to do panels like this at AFCEA conferences. So thanks for having me.
Thanks, Steve. Greg?
Hi, good morning, everybody. Greg Kendrick, Executive Director for Marine Forces Cyberspace Command. So in that kind of couple different worlds, first one is Bridge in the Army is an old artillery guy, red leg from the Army side of the house, but on the ground component side of the house, we work heavily with the Army. But on the naval side of the house, ensuring proper naval integration, because the way we get there is through the finest Navy in the world, right? So the naval integration side of the house. As the Executive Director and Deputy to Commander for General Reynolds, really about 4 big buckets that we focus on. The Marine Corps Enterprise Network, NIPR and SIPR. We have to run that, but now we're also in the process of 2 major initiatives. One is modernizing it. We call that the objective architecture that we're moving to, and that will include the cloud, right? So how we get there, that's what we're working rapidly on. We have about a 12-month goal, and we're about 3 months into it right now. The other one is the command and control of the 13 cyber mission forces. We talked about 8 defensive teams, several offensive teams. And in that role, we serve Commander U.S. Cyber Command by being his integration team. Our Joint Force Headquarters supports U.S. Special Operations Command, the Theater Special Operations Command, and all the operational units that U.S. Special Operations Command has. And then the final bucket we have is we help inform the service. And so we've just established the Deputy Commandant for Information, coming up on about 10 months now, Lieutenant General O'Donohue. And within the service, Commandant General Neller has definitely tried to grow and inculcate cyber into our operational warfighting capability. Inside the service, we're building defensive cyber operations, internal defensive measure companies. So think companies now, company units, to help protect and secure our networks. And then also we have the MEF information group. So taking the information group capability of the new information domain, right, as we're moving out, and actually putting that side into the MEF, the Marine Expeditionary Forces, to really inculcate that into the ground and air combat side of the house. So we are helping to educate and operate the service in regards to those domains as the service builds its capacity and capability. With that, I'll turn it over to the finest Navy Chief of Staff that I know at Fleet Cyber.
Oh, wow. Today, as of, okay, 10:45. Okay, good morning. James Mills. I'm a recovering surface warfare officer, currently the Chief of Staff at U.S. Fleet Cyber Command, U.S. 10th Fleet. I've been one of the plank owners of the information professional community in the Navy for a while with both Atlantic Fleet and Pacific Fleet experience. Also, in that career, I guess, spans a lot of different initiatives that got us from net-centric warfare on up to other command and control emphasis on to today's cyber capabilities, both offensive and defensive. So, and even as General Wood mentioned, I was in that era when General Wood and General Mattis were there. I was in the J8 at JIFCOM, so definitely working a lot of these similar issues throughout that career. My prior job was the commanding officer of the Naval Information Operations Command Hawaii, Task Force 1070. The significance there is that spans the entire Pacific to the Middle East, and it was the largest concentration, the commanding officer for the largest concentration of the Navy's cyber mission force elements. Now, as a Chief of Staff, I get, first I'm glad that I had an excuse to get out of the office, so thank Admiral Creighton for that. But as far as the U.S. Fleet Cyber Command, U.S. 10th Fleet, that's comprised of a global force that has a mission that spans command and control, communications to support the entire U.S. Navy and the fleet, includes operations and protection and defense of the Navy Marine Corps Internet, OneNet oversees OneNet, and also our fleet networks. It also has a association with the National Security Agency and has a signals intelligence and cryptologic warfare mission set that we support the entire U.S. fleet with. We're also the naval component for space to U.S. STRATCOM, and also to U.S. Cyber Command, we're the naval cyber component, so responsible for the Navy's 40 cyber mission force teams. That force spans about 16,000 for the mainline comms and SIGINT, all of our communication stations and NIOX, and about 1,860 personnel for the 40 cyber mission force teams. As far as things that we're looking forward to getting, as there are a lot of initiatives in the Navy related to getting to the cloud, defense of the cloud, that's a keen interest item. Also, how we can operate at net speed, getting things like machine learning, artificial intelligence capabilities in the fleet, and also data analytics is a big emphasis. Thanks.
Awesome. All right. So you can see they don't have much experience at all. So it should be easy to stump them. All right, James, I'm going to start with you. You didn't think I was going to start with you. I'm going to keep you on your toes. I'm going to start with you with my first question.
Okay.
And then we'll come to Steve's. We'll rotate this way. So the first question is, what needs to happen to allow increased exchange of cyber information and intelligence with international and coalition military partners? What are the technology needs?
Okay, so easy question.
Yeah.
Okay, you're right. So, and one that's not been, over the years we've always struggled, I think, because we don't fight by ourselves. We fight as a coalition. We fight with our partners. I think just because of the way some of the policies have been within the Department of Defense, it's been a little bit difficult in recent years to share to the extent we want with our partners in cyber, and that's mostly focused on defensive side of the house with the ability to understand where the threat's coming from, that threat intelligence piece, to have both us and them understand what are those critical nodes that need to be protected, and what is the risk that we're taking on as we operate together. So I think that's really the key focus, not so much on the offensive side. So there have been progress in the Navy. We actually have made some progress with a couple of partners in the Far East in recent years with building better cyber relationships, but again, that's more of a policy issue, I think. I don't think the technology is so much. I mean, the technology, in some cases, some of our partners are actually more agile, and for example, the Australians are leaders in some of these cyber areas where they're able to deliver those capabilities out to their fleet in a much more rapid fashion and are very agile in delivering those capabilities. So in some ways, we need to learn from them. So I don't think it's so much of a technology thing as it is more of a policy piece, and getting those structures in place where we have a free flow of the right types of information at the right classification level that we can share so that they're better apprised of what the threats are against the coalition, as well as have a two-way street. In other words, as they learn things, we could also learn from them. So that's how I'd tackle that one.
Okay. Steve?
All right, so I think the basis for that is really the intelligence sharing mechanisms that already exist between our interagency and or international and coalition members. And I think when it comes to cyber, we would build on those relationships to see where it may go in the case of cyber, right? I think for defensive cyber operations, that may lead to methodologies that require some technologies where we can do enhanced sensors, but that data has to be, those sensors have to be placed locally, because in general, when you're willing with these partners, they don't want to give you all that data, right? So kind of the dream of a lot of folks is let me get full PCAP of everything in the world and put it into a centralized database.
Easy.
It's real easy, right? We all know that's very difficult. So from a technology perspective, because I think that was the crux of your question, what kind of technology can we develop? I think we need to have sensors that can be placed locally and do the processing there on the data that's owned by that local host country, and then just the important information is sent back so we can share those for indications and warning. So I look for machine learning, that type of capability that can quickly detect and then report up while protecting the local data so it doesn't get extracted out. So.
Awesome.
So I don't envy your task trying to get a bunch of international partners to share threat intelligence. That's got to be a hard proposition to accomplish. I will tell you that we tried to do it in the commercial sector and had some success, so maybe I should give you some advice on things we've learned, all right? We created this thing called the Cyber Threat Alliance, which is a bunch of security vendors like Palo Alto Networks, realizing for the first time that it makes sense that we share intelligence with each other so that our common customers don't have to figure it out themselves and update the products independently. Because every one of the vendors has a way to update our own products automatically, right? What that means is, like I told you before, I run the threat intelligence team at Palo Alto Networks. When we discover a new bad thing, we can update our own products with multiple prevention controls down the kill chain, distribute it to 50,000 customers around the world in about 5 minutes, okay? All the security vendors have similar capability. Ours is better, okay? But they have similar capability, all right? So the idea then is that we could share threat intelligence with security vendors. You can blanket the world with prevention controls for the latest bad guys. So we've learned a couple of things. When you look at other sharing organizations, even the good ones, everybody points to the financial sector, ISAC, as being the crown jewel in sharing organizations, and they're very good. But even they have two big problems. First, not everybody shares. Only the big guys share. The Bank of America guys, the Citibanks, they have resources and people, so it's easy for them to share threat intelligence with the group. But that community bank that's run by two guys and a dog in the back room, they manage the firewall, the printer, and they get coffee, all right? They do not have time to share threat intelligence, all right? So they have a hard time getting everybody to share. In the Cyber Threat Alliance, we recognized that as a problem and said, you can't be in the club unless you share. And we measure it every day, right? And then we send a report out to all the CEOs in charge of those companies to publicly shame them all if they don't meet the minimum requirements, right? So that is some advice to you if you can get that going. Make it sure they have to share. The second thing is, I'll push back a little bit on the technology thing. Most of us are sharing information but relying on humans to figure out if it's important to me, figure out what I need to do about it, and then figure out how to do it. Most people never get around to the do it part because it's very manual, okay? My boss says we bring people to a software fight, okay? We're never going to catch up with that. So whatever you do for your sharing organization, there has to be a technology piece that takes the intelligence and figures out what controls to put in place with it automatically so that your people don't have to do it themselves. And I'll stop.
Awesome.
So I have some good friends on the CTA, so understand where that's coming from. So I'm going to kind of key off the last piece you were saying, but a little bit of a different tack. And I would say people are critical in the fact that personalities matter, right? We're talking about data, but in the end state, personalities matter. And it seems like we form the coalitions whenever we need or want something based on an enduring basis. So the first step I'd venture to say was you got to get the law and policy right. Jim's right. A lot of it figures out on the law and policy side of the house. But if you can get the law and policy to establish an international coalition cyber support center, at that, now that's step one, and then two is, yes, you need the autonomous learning and the autonomous capabilities so that you get one decision maker, and when that decision maker is in the loop, you make the decision and it immediately populates or moves out. The one thing that I would like it to that is actually great in America is the cooperative. So if you think of a co-op, that's what this should be in, and I think that actually fits to Rick's last point is the fact that everybody is invested, everybody has skin in a game in a co-op. It's not big people and little people, it's everybody with the same type of shares that you have, and now they even have multidisciplinary and investor type co-op. So I think on that side of the house, if you look at a co-op, or we could set up an international co-op, that to me would be the biggest way to do it. Technology transfer laws definitely have to change. We have to get over that, quite frankly. We have to kind of a little bit get over ourselves.
Yeah.
That's all.
All right. Excellent. All right. Next question. Given that we have such a broad range of offensive and defensive experts here, I think this is going to be a good one. So where are we headed with closer integration of offensive and defensive cyber? And how does this relate to joint military operations? And what, if any, technology implications are there? So let's see, I started with James, so now I'm going to start with Steve.
Okay, so I think the basis for this is really what I call defend the nation mission. I view the best defense as a strong deterrence to impose costs on our adversaries so they have to recalculate what they may do to us in their type of cyberspace operations. So by enabling effects-based operations in cyber against our adversaries, they will have to recalculate what they're going to do when they do things against us. And so a strong deterrence is where I think mixing offense and defense is key. When it comes to the joint military operations, I believe that we're focused on presenting multiple dilemmas to our adversary. We call it multi-domain battle in the Army. And so the Joint Forces Commander must present multiple dilemmas when we get to that state. And cyber is just another one of those. And so we want to make sure that we're able to synchronize our cyber effects with the kinetic effects to overwhelm the adversary to have a positive outcome in our favor. So the technology curve is going to always continue to increase. You know, today it's AI, machine learning, sensor technology. Those are all things we need to track. However, the biggest difference will be how quickly our formations can adapt that technology and utilize it to our best effects. So while the technology will always change and the paradigm is going to be there, we need to have an agile workforce that can adapt and utilize it when you want to mix offense and defense.
All right.
So I think for offense, defense, I want to focus on defensive first that will inform the offensive mission. Where the industry has gotten away from, where governments have gotten away from is not realizing or not remembering that there are humans behind the keyboard doing the attacks. They all have motivations, and they all have playbooks that they run that they don't change that often. Okay, they have multiple sequence of steps they have to get through in order to accomplish their mission, whether it's crime or hacktivism or espionage or warfare, all right? And they don't wholesale change those every day. They may change a little part of that. All right, so when the bad guy comes to work in the morning and she grabs her cup of coffee and she sits down at her keyboard and she says, I'm going to go after Palo Alto Networks, she opens up her notebook and says, okay, step 1 is this, step 2 is this, step 3 is this. How many notebooks do you think there are? Okay, we don't think there are that many. Most of us think it's less than 100. Most of the intelligence community thinks it's less than 50. All right, so if we can understand the offensive side of the adversary and understand completely their 50 adversary playbooks and keep them up to date as they change, We can hand that to the offensive side. You can learn how they do it and take it in, and so you can accomplish your offensive mission by observing what the other bad guys do.
So concur everything Steve and Rick just said. So I'm not going to repeat what they said. I'll just focus on two areas inside the lethality and the readiness. So it's all about Secretary Mattis, lethality and readiness. So the way to increase the lethality and the readiness of the teams is defensive and offensive. We built them separate, but in the Marine Corps, we're looking at the OC field, and we're going to merge the OC field because the best defender is a good offender, and the good side on the offense is understanding how you actually defend it, which is really what you two said, just in different language, I guess Chicago. I would say the biggest thing is, I'm a Chicago guy, so the biggest thing is keep it simple. So all the hardware needs and software needs to be as interoperable as possible so you can go back and forth between missions. Great GUIs in the end state, right? Because the senior leadership right now, our demographics moving up, it's going to be at least 2 generations before we're completely comfortable with the technology. So the greater the GUI, the more investment in the GUI, the better that you're going to be. And then I would just look at it the way we look at it is IT is the skeleton, if you will, for the hardware skeleton for the future MAGTF force, and cyber is the connective tissue that's going to increase the lethality and the readiness across all the domains and the MAGTF force as we engage the enemy.
So I'd offer on the coordination between offense and defense here. I think it's very similar to traditional conventional warfare, you know, the other warfare areas as far as the benefit you gain by strong linkage and coordination between offensive and defensive maneuver. So I don't think it's any different than that. I think there was in past a thought that we needed to keep them separate and it would be more effective that way, but that's actually the reverse. You can actually amplify the capability by that linkage, just as Gregg mentioned. You know, you're better as an offense side if you understand the defensive characteristics, and better as a defender if you understand the offensive capabilities. And we've seen that, and it's been proven. So I think there's that information linkage that you have that makes it better. That helps with response. If you're doing maneuvers on one side or the other, they will inform how you need to take that next step in that campaign after that. So it all contributes to agility and lethality if we have that linkage and coordination. So I will answer a technology question this time. I think there is a definite technology need and gap there on the defensive side. It mostly relates to having the ability for our forces to have speed and to be able to assure the mission, to have mission assurance capability. So at Fleet Cyber, what we try to do is we're trying to get the defensive side what we call left of click. So we've been in this world of compliance for a long time, and that's effectively like doing damage control, taking the hit and doing damage control on the ship. We want to take out the adversary's capabilities before they ever enter our networks, if at all possible. So in order to do that, we've got to gain better capabilities that give us situational awareness of our networks. We need to link in that threat intelligence, what we call cyber or intel in support of cyber. And also we need to build in countermeasures that operate at machine speed that can not wait for the human to get involved. On the offensive side, it's mostly about the tailoring to the threat, and the agility, I think, is where the technology need is.
All right. So my next question, it might be awkward to start with Rick, but you know what, Rick? You're so smart. We're gonna go right there.
I just make stuff up, so.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
So there's been dialogue about a national strategy, like a whole of government approach for defensive cyberspace operations. And so the question is, what is DoD's role? But you're not in DoD, but you used to be, so I'm sure you have an opinion. And are there any implications for technology with regard to that?
Yeah, I think I am working on a project that involves DoD, but the entire ecosystem of commercial, government, and academia. We started this project about 2 years ago. It's called the Cyber Moonshot. Has anybody heard of that before? Okay, a couple of you. All right, it started a couple years ago at the Joint Service Academy Cybersecurity Summit. This is a group of old alumni academy grads from all the academy, Army, Navy, Air Force, and all the others, okay? And with a bunch of government leaders trying to figure out what we should do in the future. And what emerged is this idea of a cyber moonshot, and it started from President Kennedy's big speech at Rice University back in the early 1960s when he says, we're going to put a man on the moon and bring him back safely in 10 years, not because it's easy, but because it's hard, all right? Because that's what our nation does. So we put that in front of that group and started this discussion. It has evolved into a discussion point at the NSTAC going on right now. They are working on it at this very moment. We'll see their first paper on the Cyber Moonshot idea probably in June this year, next month. All right, and then the Joint Service Academy Cybersecurity Summit working committees will pick it up and try to put some meat on the bones to figure out what needs to be done. And here's the only caution I'll say about this, right? As soon as I tell this to people, they immediately want to solve all the problems with technology. That is not what this is about, okay? What we're trying to do is identify the things that we need in 10 years that will make the internet safe. Not safer, safe. So if you put that before you, okay, what do you think we need? Let's identify those topics. We think there's probably going to be 7 or 10 to 10 pillars of ideas. I know 2 or 3 of them right now, and a lot of people have ideas about what the others are, and they will start to put ideas behind those this year. If you're interested in that, come talk to me afterwards. I'll put you on one of the working committees.
So first off, I guess the way I'd look at it is it needs to be whole of nation. So I think it speaks on what Rick is talking about. But I also think it goes back to our first question on the international partnership. So I would actually broaden it to more than whole of nation, but across the world. And the moonshot, the critical piece was, right, so it was across the free world. How do we actually get there? So to me, the technological informations are, we have to figure out how to work within the intellectual property standards so that there can be wins across the board, right? Because in the end, we are a commercial type economics-driven society. So I go back to what NASA did, which is actually along the moonshot
the real
you
moonshot.
talked about. Right, yeah. But so NASA developed all this capability, right? Microwave ovens, the thin, after the run, you know, you get the thin little jacket to keep you warm, et cetera. And then it became commercialized. And that's okay. So if we use NASA-like foundation to go ahead and drive us, and then we have to figure out the intellectual property. The other thing that NASA did, or that we did, is we shared risk. And right now, I think as government, we take a lot of that risk on, and I think we have to figure out a better partnership to be able to share the risk. And so when you look at US SOCOM SoftWorks or some capability like that, right, there's different ways to share risk, and we have to figure it out. Again, I'd go back to the cooperative. And to me, this is probably the biggest area where you need artificial intelligence side of the house, because when you're looking to the future like this, this is where I think DOD can we can provide the investment mechanism. We're not one big gorilla compared to the other U.S. Agencies with the Fourth Estate and the military departments. We're more like, you know, several gorillas, et cetera. But if we can come together and determine and focus our research and our research investment to actually help jumpstart, I think that would be good. But part of it also is, the last thing I would say is just geographically, I know DIUX is out in Mountain View and Silicon Valley and Boston and going into Austin, and I think then eventually global. I would say that part of it needs to come here. Like, we need to bring Silicon Valley, we physically actually here as well, because this is where most of the national government resides.
Okay, I'll jump on this grenade here. So I agree. You know, Rick and Gregg have made many great points, and I think, you know, from the standpoint of from Fleet Cyber's standpoint, it is all about you know, we're trying our best effort to link across not just DoD, interagency, joint community, coalition partners that we work with, but also, you know, industry and academia. We have set up a reserve unit that has a unique linkage with one of the nation's top academic institutions. We do try to tap into DIUX and other type of linkages with industry. I think that, you know, the perspective is whether it's a threat kind of thing or whether it's an advanced technology that's going to come, it's probably going to be seen in industry or academia. You know, .com and .edu are probably going to see it before .mil or .gov. I think one of the things that we probably could do better as Department of Defense is getting those building the leaders that think differently, you know, that have opened the aperture to that other aspect to think outside of DoD think. So that means we need to have more emphasis on fellowships, internships, other opportunities. The Navy has done that. We could probably do a little bit more. And while this is a big problem, I think just the scale of the Department of the Navy and the U.S. Navy, we kind of have a problem inside just to synchronize all of our different Echelon 2 commands and have visibility of those activities and make sure we're responding to any event, cyber incident or something in a unified manner. That's a challenge in and of itself. So we've got to tackle that as well.
Steve?
Okay, so the obligatory things, defending the DODIN is U.S. CyberCan's #1 mission. So when it comes to DODIN, DoD has a lead. For the rest of the SICR, DHS or another federal agency will be the lead federal agency, and then DoD will support if requested and directed to support. So when it comes to defensive cyberspace on those areas, that's what I see as DoD's role. And when we talk about the technology, I completely agree with what the other members have said. So if I take off my military uniform and I put on my Silicon Valley hat, so I did time at DIUX when they first started up out in the Valley. And one of the big differences was the culture gap between DoD and a tech sector guy, right? So the analogy I say is, when I'm a startup guy, I spin my software every 6 weeks, I spin my hardware every 18 months, and I'm going to start a new company every 4 years. So when DoD wants to do an acquisition and they come to a Silicon Valley guy, it's generally like twice that long to get a contract that's going to last. And so that gap is very big. And I use that analogy to let people know what that big gap is. Now at DIUX, we did a lot of things, try to reach out to the tech sector and say, hey, your business model, because our goal as a startup is to get acquired within 4 years or go public or some other exit strategy. The bigger companies, and the big five in the defense industrial base, right, they understand how the defense industrial base works. A bunch of retired generals and colonels understand that methodology. So to the tech sector guys who like to move quickly, they kind of view it as, if I have a cool technology, I'll sell it to one of the big five or through some other lab, and then maybe in 10 years it will show up in a soldier's hand or something like that, right? And we're trying to reduce that latency so that we can get some of the best out there, because our adversaries are doing that, right? So when you talk about whole of government, of whole of nation, if you look at what some of our other great competition countries are doing, they have a pretty good stated policy. Take artificial intelligence, for example, right? Those countries are doing things that we can't necessarily easily do in our nation because we worry about our privacy laws. And if you take artificial intelligence, we have a really good sector that's doing things. One of the things I think they struggle with when I talk to my friends in the Valley is getting actual large sets of big data. And the reason is you want to learn with your engines, and the best way to learn is you got to have really valid data. Well, in another country, they collect that data because individuals don't have those same rights, and they give that to their AI startups. So they have an edge on competing with us in this great power competition. So one of the things we can do, I think, in the US government, while still protecting our personal liberties, is think of ways through DoD and the rest of government to help some of these AI startups in Boston and AI so that we have that edge. Similar to the moonshot, where the president said, hey, we're going to get there because it's difficult. We have other countries that are saying, hey, we think AI is important, so we need to put resources behind it. And they're throwing massive amounts of resources, which isn't just money, right? It's intellectual capital with people, and in this case, data. We need to think about how we can use that with the forces that we have to help us move forward. So,
I don't think that was the question, but that was awesome. I'm not sure. That was awesome, Steve.
You wanted an outlier. So.
Yeah, no, I loved it. I loved that. All right, so next question is.
How about, could I propose if it's me as lead, could we go to 5?
Skip to question 5, awesome.
Yeah,
So,
Jim should be better on 4.
yeah, awesome.
What's this, tagging me? What?
So what does defensive cyberspace operations need in terms of academia and think tank partnerships over the next 3 to 5 years and perhaps beyond that?
Yeah.
So Greg, that's you, right?
Yeah, is that okay? Yeah, if you don't mind. So thanks for letting me be a little selective on that side of the house, Kathy. I appreciate it. So the reason I wanted to talk about this one, because for the last about year or so, been working on an initiative that we have from the Commandant, and he's been trying to get us to focus on how do we build a cyber auxiliary. So recognizing from the cyber force, 133 teams are not going to be enough, 68 defensive teams are not going to be enough. The ISACs, ISOWs, the 16 sectors, we're just not moving at the rapid pace that we really need to move. And he also wants to bring the Marine Corps tighter with the American public, right? 1% of the American public serves. And as I just learned last week, 90% of the casualties come from 4% of the history of the United States come from 4% of the armed forces, which are the infantry squads. That's where 90% of the casualties come, and only 1% of the budget goes towards that. So 94-1. This is on the mind of Secretary Mattis how we go there. And the Commandant's heard that, and he's asked us to go out with academia. So as you look at the or as you look at the academic centers of excellence, the first thing is, and you see it with Google today, academia can teach the American populace and the students that it's okay to work with government. It's okay to work with the U.S. government. It's okay to work with the U.S. military because we're actually in this together. It's a true partnership. The other side is, and you heard this from Admiral Rogers over the last several months, is academia needs to really provide that strategic insight and thought. If we get hit with cyber, we don't have to respond in cyber. If we get hit with cyber, how do we respond? What is the strategic level of response that is acceptable with the international standards and laws that are out there, which they aren't out there, and a lot of those are driven in the nuclear age through the academic thought pieces that would come in and out of government and the doctoral thesis. So we really need to emphasize that. We need academia's help in regards to doing that. And then on the cyber auxiliary, we can use the undergraduates, the masters, the doctors side of the house to come in and use their theses inside the DODIN, bringing the technology from the private sector, using their public sector funds, internships and fellowships, which we're building with national universities, as well as local regional community colleges, to be able to solve our problems because we just can't do it on ourselves. And I think that also helps drive over the intellectual property side of the house too, if it's from an academic viewpoint. The biggest thing that I'll kind of close with is there are kind of 4 critical skill sets that everybody's kind of identified now. So right now it's data engineer, data scientist, your software developer, and then your technical analyst. So what is academia doing to be able to speed those up? Not a 4-year degree. How can those people do 2 years or 18 months or whatever the right number is and then become part of the workforce and finish their degree? So going towards more of a competency-based education versus a degree-based education. And then the biggest thing, just a footnote, I started with it, I'll end with it. It's okay to work with government. It's okay to work with government. It's really okay to work with government.
Wait, let me get that.
What?
Oh, you want me
Like
to
he
jump in?
did.
So just a couple quick points on that. I can't top what Gregg just said, but I'd offer a couple different perspectives on the inside of DoD as far as, okay, we have to have those partnerships with academia and industry, but also we need a certain base of talent within the Department of Defense as well. So a couple different things that, and there is an extreme demand for in cyber security, cyber defense talent across the board. So it's a challenge to go find the right skill set that's already prepared. So in some sense, the DoD has to build that talent and retain it by giving them opportunities of things that they couldn't do anywhere else. So a couple different initiatives that are ongoing right now. One is the Cyber Accepted Service that OSD is sponsored to start. We're starting in the throes of implementation of that, which gives us a little more agility on the civilian workforce to provide retention bonuses and other incentives and a more agile way of allowing them to progress in their careers to support cyber-related functions. Another thing that Fleet Cyber Command took upon itself a couple years ago was to look at with the University of Maryland, we did a look with cyber aptitude testing. So there's, all cyber warriors are not the same. So there's differences between the unique work roles and skill sets that are required across the spectrum, from operations to network operations to defensive cyberspace operations to offensive cyberspace operations. So it also is a good sense to make sure that we're pairing the person with the right path and skill sets so they can perform better, and they're probably going to be more interested in doing what they're doing. So there's more work that needs to be done in that area, but that's just an interesting side note.
Steve.
Okay, so this is about academia, think tanks, and partnerships. So on the policy side, I think it's important that we have those discussions because, as already been brought up, we have an open society, right? And we're going against adversaries that don't necessarily have that open society, where the government just says, hey, these are the confines, we're going to take your data, you don't have as much liberties as we do. And I think those are very important things to discuss in the open public so that we can come to some terms with that. Because I think as technology changes and the rate of change will continue to happen, our policies and legal frameworks are always going to lag. And if they lag too far, we're going to be stuck with some of the problems we have today. So I make an observation. I think and it's a personal observation. In Europe, I generally think the folks in Europe, they They trust their government with their data, but they don't trust industry. In the US, it's the opposite. They don't trust the government with data, but they trust industry. And I think that's something that the think tanks can look at and associate. And in other parts of the world, they don't have a choice, but government and industry have all their data. So I think that's an interesting policy thing or discussion point that our think tanks can talk about. And related to technology, because on the previous question I didn't get to talk about what kind of cool technology I think is out there. The technology that's coming out is very important, but the point I want to make is that technology is always going to change. And so these think tanks can help us understand what that change is going to be and how our policies and leadership decisions should be able to reflect that. And because of those changes, I think those think tanks are really the leading ways that will influence our policymakers and our leadership. Because what I fear is, while I agree with you that cyberspace, while being highly technical, it actually does come down to a human element, we still need leaders and policymakers that understand how technology affects the human domain. And because technology is changing so rapidly, a lot of the senior leaders don't have that technical capability just because they can't keep up with all the technological changes. And I think that's a challenge that we have as leaders, to be open to that type of change.
One quick point on the cyber auxiliary, okay? Both the commercial world and the government side, we have to get much better at moving people between the two worlds, all right, and establishing those relationships. I know we talk about this, I've been talking about this for 15 years, never have been able to do it. We have an experiment running at Palo Alto Networks right now where we have Captain Pete Reynolds, who's a cyber commander or cybercom ninja warrior kind of guy, all right? But he works for us part-time. Okay, and not just, he's been working with us for 2 or 3 years now. So we have this long-lasting relationship that he understands how the commercial sector thinks about cybersecurity, and he understands how the government does. He's even written a fantastic report for the commercial sector called Silver Terrier that's purely commercial and Palo Alto Networks, but you can see his ninja cybercam mind behind it, all right? So go look at it, Silver Terrier. But that is an example of something that could work, and we could blow it out across the coastal country.
All right. So I just have to add a anecdote here. So what you're saying is technology will change the way we think of certain jobs, right? Oh. Certain jobs might go away. So to that point, my 16-year-old the other day said, I said something about Jesus was a carpenter. And she goes, there's such a thing as a carpenter? I thought he was a carpenter, like he made carpets. So anyway, to that point, new generation is different. Anyway, I'm such a great mom. So we touched on this in the last question, but Gregg camped out on it, but I want to take another run at it. So what are the critical skills of DoD defensive cyberspace operations workforce now and in the future? And what can DoD do now to continue pressing forward in this area of workforce preparation? What can business do? What can academia do? So I think we kind of hit on this, but if we want to move quickly through this one, who are we starting with? James?
Thank you. Okay, so I guess for critical skills, yeah, I mean, so you've got the range of gamut here, again, because we have different work roles. And another thing that the Fleet Cyber Command did in this last year was there's an effort out of Fleet Forces Command to do what's called the fleet design. And we took an aspect of that looked at cyber defense. So it's not just about the operator or the person on keyboard. It's also about everything from the acquisition, from the requirement side and the acquisition side to the actual operations, all underpinned by intelligence. So it's everything from supply chain issues, systems engineering, how you design things, how you specify a requirement, how you ensure information assurance, policy is implemented properly, and then on the operations side, how can you understand, when to disparate things that happen and potentially could happen globally that may be related, how can you fuse that together to get it intent or understanding of what an adversary may be doing. And then there's the depth of understanding the system and the knowledge. The way our cyber mission force is structured, they're focused on a lot of skills that are related to IP-type networks, as far as general understanding of cyber security concepts, those sorts of things. But it could be, some type of control system that is under threat. So that may be a completely different technology basis. It may have some other expertise that's required. So this is not a simple answer to come back and say these are the exact knowledge, skills, and abilities. We need everything. In my view, we need everything from systems engineers who understand the complexities of cyber and how that might affect fault tolerance to a cyber ninja coder, who can spew out code, at 1,000 lines per minute. We have that whole spectrum. So but the biggest thing at the core, I think, from the military operations standpoint, is going to be the critical thinking skills. It's going to be the ability to be a planner. Military planning still is critical in this area, and it's also going to be some analysis standpoint. There's a lot of work that has to be done on the intelligence side, the threat intelligence, the understanding of what's really at risk and what do we have to do without disabling the mission that we're supporting.
Awesome. You know what? I'm going to skip to the last question because I want to leave some time for the audience's questions. And so, Steve, with heavy emphasis toward moving DoD information to private sector-based cloud, how do commanders, directors ensure their information is secure and adequately defended?
Okay, so I would say that the most important thing that we can do when we move to the cloud is to make sure we write the appropriate contracts that will spell out oversight, security, and auditing methodologies. So if a breach occurs, what rights do we have as the customer to send in, say, a CPT to do analysis? And then more importantly, if in our routine checks, if we think that from the O&M perspective, a certain set of security procedures need to be put in place, which cost money, how do we adjudicate that quickly? Right? Because from the business sector point of view, I sign a contract to provide you a service. I run it to be most efficient and effective. And from the DoD side, we're trying to say, hey, security is not it's generally the most important thing, but we're looking for those efficiencies when we go to the cloud. So I think that that's the most important thing is make sure we have the contracts in place for those folks to do that type of stuff. I also think from the commercial sector side, there's some interesting technologies that are coming out, so I'm going to spin some of those things out there as a guy from Silicon Valley who loves talking about technology. And this could potentially help folks understand as they move to the cloud the types of things that we could do to make things more secure. One of them is called Cyber Moving Target. That's the concept where in, say, an operating system, you have a traditional operating system that does certain things, and we dynamically move things around. So maybe the heap gets moved, maybe the interrupt service routines are moved, and they're dynamically moving around. I've even seen work where in a VM system where the application's running, we may swap out the operating system to make sure that an adversary can't get their malware implanted in there. And as you go to the cloud, more and more of these things are virtualized, right? So I think that's an interesting technology that can help us. There's another thing called computation on encrypted data. So the data is encrypted, and you can pass it to a cloud instance, and it could do some computations on it and return stuff on it without decrypting it. It's a very interesting methodology. It's very slow right now, but I think there's some more research that could be done to move that forward. Another methodology is you have lots of data out there. When you go to the cloud, and we want to run heuristics on it, and I would say instead of moving that data to a central repository to run your big data analytics, we should push the algorithms to the data. So if you have a lot of cloud instances, let's figure out what kind of algorithms we have, push it to the data, do the computation, and send that information back. And then the last one I'll talk about, because I haven't seen anybody really pushing this, but I call that 3D visualization. In the sense that whenever I go to one of these NOCs and I see things, there's a bunch of screens and a bunch of like two-dimensional things where people are looking at network traffic, flow, bandwidth utilization, and so forth. And I believe you look at the gaming world and the medical world where they've taken lots of data and they've put it in a 3D format, and they can look at it with the new type of technologies that we have, the human brain can see anomalies much quicker. So I think as we go to the cloud to get a dashboard to make these things easier for our commanders, who probably aren't the most, I mean, they're not technical because they're leaders. If we can provide dashboards that a human can understand intuitively and quickly, those are the type of tool sets we should be looking for. Thanks.
So I would say, when you go to the cloud, I'm going to clear up a misconception, okay? The cloud vendors don't own the data. You own your data, okay? Even if you get them FedRAMP certified, what you are doing is certifying that they comply with a bunch of physical and cyber compliance rules that protects their environments, not your data, right? What you want to do when you go to the cloud is deploy the same security solutions that you have in your data centers, behind your perimeter, on your mobile devices in the cloud. You don't want to deploy more security stuff. You already don't have enough people to manage the stuff you already have. You want to deploy the same things that you have in the cloud. Or if you can't manage that, you have to deploy something that integrates with the things that you already have. So it makes your staff's job easier. Okay? So just understand, the cloud providers are never going to give you access to their environments if there's a breach. That is on you. If there's a breach, you have to be able to respond to it.
So the only thing I would say is I don't want to actually bring my latent applications to the cloud.
Yeah, don't do that.
I'd like to modernize if that'd be okay.
In the perimeter, yeah.
So, building off Steve, contracts right, absolutely, but I think actually the department needs to rewrite and relook DoD Acquisition 5000 in regards to the entire cyber force across the board. It's too old, it's too latent, it doesn't work. And I don't think we'll get pushback from the acquisition community because I think they're struggling as well. But this is where we need the private sector really to help us. Okay, what is a shared risk relationship in the cyber acquisition that would be good? I like the idea of actually having personnel on site in regards to the different commercial cloud providers. We have to share those capabilities as well. Without a doubt, because we have both physical as well as technical capabilities that we should merge into the cloud. But actually being there on site and physically invested, there's a commercial decision point, decision line, and then there's our decision point, decision line.
Can I pop in there for a second?
Absolutely.
You have to rethink what you think your data is in a cloud provider. Because we all have this mental image that our data is sitting on a server in the Amazon cloud. That is not what's happening, all right? They have distributed that information across their entire infrastructure around the world, all right? So it isn't like you can put a guy in there and say, oh, that's my data, go check on it. That is not the way it's going to be, right?
Right, but if you have to be in their security center, from that perspective. And then the other side is, just like the commercial side, we have to make sure our data doesn't populate the data centers that in different countries that have laws that could actually be harmful to us in regards to that.
They can do that, yeah.
And then the other thing is just random, I think Steve said it, but random IP space movement, dynamic or random, however you want to call it. Jim?
So, I mean, I'll be heartily in agreement with all. It's first and foremost, it's all about the data. And I think linking back to some of the earlier questions we had, I think with partnerships and how we do mission and who we're engaging from a mission standpoint, I think where there's a lot of work still to do, at least within the Department of Navy, is what's that data strategy? What are those data standards? What's that secure? How are we securing that data? Some of what we know of incidents in the cloud thus far have been exactly to Rick's point. I mean, it's been the user. So there are some questions that we have to address. One is, the Navy is going full force towards several different cloud initiatives, but there's some challenges. These things called ships that move, depending on satellite communications. So to get back to the cloud, the big cloud, there's some challenges there when you're in a environment like that, a distributed over the horizon kind of environment like that we have to address. And then there's also, I think the other aspect is the question, so where does the DODIN begin and end in the cloud? When we're charged with protecting the DODIN, and now it's in some commercial vendors' infrastructure, is that data part of the DODIN? Those kinds of questions, and how do we have the right situational awareness and ability to respond, if so. So those are some big questions the Navy's tackling right now.
Awesome. Thank you. So if we could, we'd like to see what questions we've gotten from the audience.
Thank you, ma'am. We have about 12 minutes for questions, and we have a long list. We'll get through as many as possible. First one, what does the cybersecurity analogy to, quote, fire and fury the likes of which the world has never seen, look like to the target nation's systems?
Wow.
Wow.
So
Sounds like a great sci-fi book.
Yeah.
Okay.
on these, why don't, since there's a bunch of questions, maybe we just one person take it and answer it, and then we move on to the next one. So who'd like to take that one?
How about the National Mission Force?
Yes, I think CNMF.
All right,
I vote
Steve,
for CNMF.
thoughts?
Okay, great. So again, I can only guess kind of what that question is looking at, but what that sounds like to me is some type of DDoS attack when he says, fire and fury in the cyber realm. But again, that's kind of like open source. People know all kinds of effects that DDoSes do, and from my perspective, I can imagine that's kind of what they're looking at. So I'll leave it at that.
This is a pet peeve of mine, right? As we talk about cyber warfare and cyber crime and cyber hacktivism, most of the press calls everything cyber warfare, and I think that's really dumb, right? And for cyber warfare to be applied, you have to either destroy critical infrastructure of your target, or you have to kill people, right? So that would be your fire and fury stuff. Whatever cyber attack would accomplish that.
Okay, next question.
Industry can support defensive cyber operations. However, can you explain Cybercom thoughts on firing cyber bullets from industry or carrier platforms that would be obviously attributable and cause loss to global business?
Sounds like an industry
Greg.
question.
I did the last.
From the industry perspective, we are never, ever going to do offensive cyber operations, okay? Because it sounds good when you say it fast, but the enemy gets a vote, and if I do something on the offensive side, I'm probably going to get smashed by 1,000 different directions. I gladly defer to the government for offensive cyber.
Greg?
So I just say when you look at like Sony, from that, so let's just use that as the example. When I was working down in a different billet, but the end state is when we looked at that aspect, that's when the government stood in, right? So Sony was worried about their intellectual property, getting the intellectual property back, but when it came to the defense of the American citizens and then the company itself, that's when this government stepped in. And if you remember, the president at that point said, I will respond to the country that we attributed it to, which at the time, it still stands as North Korea, at that point, at the time and place of my choosing. And so that's the government's role. That's not anybody else's role.
I think it goes back to that whole government approach too. It's not just DOD here. The DHS and all the other agencies have a role as well.
Correct.
We pause on that for a second to look at how unprecedented that was. The President of the United States said, we're going to respond to this, and we know who it is, and it's North Korea. Okay, that has never happened before. All right.
There's a lot of meetings. But that gets to the shared risk, too. And by the way, you don't have to respond in cyber. U.S. Trade Representative, State Department, Department of Commerce, those are some pretty heavy weapons that the United States has.
Awesome. All right, next question, please.
In a defense perspective, no one seems to be talking about looking at defense from the attacker's perspective. How are you looking at the networks from the outside and monitoring them that way?
So every cyber protection team has a threat vulnerability, or I'm sorry, a threat emulation capability, and so we are constantly using that capability, and then we have the NSA certified red team capability within each one of our services, as well as Joint Force Headquarters DODIN. So we're constantly probing ourselves, and then the other services have done it, the bug bounty or vulnerability assessment.
Yeah, so the Navy also has a heavy emphasis on using red team throughout our, as our operating forces are getting ready to deploy to make sure they're fully ready on a cyber standpoint. So I think there's that in addition to what the Cyber Mission Force provides. There's the inspection process that's being changed a little bit to be more risk-based, looking at cyber threat emulation. So those approaches I think are being made present so that our defenders are more ready and understand what that would look like.
From the commercial sector, we are collecting adversary playbooks and how they operate. You can look this up, look up adversary playbooks, Palo Alto Networks playbook viewer or something like that. We've published 3 so far. We're going to try to publish as many as we can over the next couple of years.
Yeah, so the National Mission Force has teams that are protection teams, mission teams, and support teams. And what we've done is we've created task forces that are aligned against adversaries and some technologies so that all 3 of those teams are merged together. So we're exactly looking at those types of things, how the malicious cyber actor is using technology to do things, We are working to understand their TTPs, their intent, and the technology and networks that they're using, so we can generate campaigns to counter that.
Yeah, I would just add 2 points from DODIN, JFHQ DODIN. One is our inspections have changed. The way we inspect ourselves has changed, and we're using cyber threat emulation capabilities to kind of try to hack ourselves, so red team ourselves. So that's one way. And then also there are tools that DoD is using where we're not just scanning our own networks, we're scanning gray space, looking for if our networks are projecting itself in a way that's not appropriate. So we're using tools also. All right, next question.
There is a lot of discussion on having rapid update and response on the enterprise network and associated enterprise endpoints. With cyber requirements starting to flow down to the processing elements on DoD deployed platforms, are there plans to integrate or standardize how cyber requirements are managed on these platforms to provide that same rapid update and response?
That's an O&M question.
Yeah. I don't know. Greg?
So I don't think there are right now, and this is what I was getting to with the acquisition 5000. I don't think there's performance parameters or system attributes that are specifically required out to be able to accept the technology and respond to that technology for an endpoint or midpoint security that needs to be built in, quite frankly. But we're very heavily focused on the endpoint. It's a holistic network. I think all of us at various times have talked about it. So, midpoint security from across the board needs to be emphasized as well. But I don't think there's one right now. That would be a great master's or doctoral thesis along with the private sector on how we can do it better.
I say the private sector is already way ahead of the government on this, right? We've accepted the risk that we can automatically update our own platforms with new intelligence. Government's really leery of that because we don't trust those, bastards, okay, those security vendors, right? But you have to get clear with this. The risk of not doing this is greater than the risk of doing it with people. You just can't keep up with the adversary.
All right, next question.
It was mentioned that the public does not trust government with their data, but trusts industry. What steps do you intend to take to change this issue?
Well, so we've been talking with industry folks and, like I said, think tanks and academia. The Army has something called the Army Cyber Institute. We generate some white papers to talk about, cyber capabilities. But I think in general, that's one of the things. It's not necessarily DoD's role, but as you say, it's okay to work with the government. But in an open society where you expect certain civil liberties to exist, the tough challenge is how do you now protect people when in the digital age there's so much data out there. While protecting your civil liberties, we need to figure out how we can defend you. So, in our case, we're working through some of the academic institutions, but we're not actually trying to change policy formally because DoD can't do that. So hopefully a discussion has taken place and it will go in the correct direction.
Anybody else?
So from the commercial sector, just transparency. Whatever you're doing with the data, you have to be very clear to your customers what you're doing with it, and constant reports on how you're accomplishing those metrics.
Next question.
That was our final question for the panel. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lieutenant General Bob Wood back to the stage to formally thank them on behalf of AFCEA and our audience.
Well, I think they're going to have to towel off after that hard question and answer period there. For all of you who are here, I think you have to agree this was a remarkable set of issues attacked beautifully by a panel with insights. I mean, a lot of notes being taken, a lot of ideas being generated. Let's give this panel a hand. They did a fantastic job. And Admiral Creighton, I had to chuckle a little bit when you talked about the carpenter and the carpenter as kind of a note of time passing. I also took note of, we heard cyber ninjas, and I remember in long past PowerPoint ninjas, and oh, have we progressed. Really great to hear your perspectives, and thank you for talking about lethality, enhancing lethality. Each I think person on this panel had a service perspective, an industry perspective, and frankly, a collective understanding. And it's good to see, and I know many of you have been in these events with us, you can see the progression of thought, of action, of frankly tackling of the questions before us. So it really is interesting to see that in perspective. Thank you all, Emma Creighton, very much for this panel. Let's give them one last hand, and we're going to talk next about transitioning. By the way, we will present on behalf of this panel to Fisher House a gift, AFCEA on your behalf. I really am going to give you a little bit of time. We're going to move immediately to our next speaker, and that means you get a stretch break, and it won't take too long. But let me talk about what we're up to in the afternoon as we proceed, or really to our lunchtime.